Tonight we'll delve deep into that raw, intoxicating yet less glamorous powder that once promised to make the world forget Hollywood's illusory version. Living authentically is so exhausting. So before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely love what I create here. Tell me where you're from in the comments. Local time right now. Witnessing global viewers gathering here. Always mesmerizing. Turn your phone face down. Set volume to whisper. Let's begin. In the thin, biting air of the Andes, breath is a treasure. The sun is a cruel god. A single green leaf far more than sustenance. For millennia, it was sacred communion. Before the Golden Empire rose, before Spanish galleons sliced the horizon, Toca, the sacred leaf, already existed. Its origins buried deep in South America's ancient timeline. Whispers in archaeological records trace back at least 8,000 years. Traces of its alkaloids found in the hair of mummies along Peru's coast. Those bodies wrapped in exquisite textiles, buried with small pouches, called ch's per, containing carefully preserved bundles of dried leaves. This was no casual gesture, but a ritualistic pact between humanity and the harsh landscape. The plant itself is unremarkable, a mere shrub, bearing bright green oval leaves and delicate white flowers. Later, it bears red pod minus-like fruits. It thrives on the humid, steep slopes of the Yumcas region on the eastern foothills of the Andes, a perilous vertical world where mist drowns the mountain peaks. Here, ancient civilizations learned to cultivate terraced fields. They built intricate stone walls reaching skyward, paving a stepped path for the cultivation of this sacred crop. For the Incas, this last and greatest empire of the Andes, this leaf was the world's pivot. They called it Mama Coca, a female deity, a gift bestowed upon humanity by the sun god Inti, to soothe the suffering of his people. But this gift came at a price, and was not granted to all. The Inca kingdom was a marvel of totalitarian logistics. This vast, centralized empire was bound together by an endless network of stone minus paved roads. The coca leaf was a commodity strictly controlled by the state. Its use of privilege guarded with utmost vigilance. It was reserved solely for the Sapa Inca himself, royal family members, high priests, and a select few designated classes. When priests sought to communicate with the gods or divine the future, they would chew a bundle of leaves, stuffing the leaf mass into their cheek, to allow its effects to release slowly. The patterns formed by the scattered leaves on the ceremonial cloth were interpreted as omens guiding state affairs, warfare, and life minus death decisions. High minus ranking officials carried rations of coca leaves when traveling on official business. When laborers were conscripted for CU and TA labor, the compulsory public service that built the temples of Cusco and the fortress of Machu Picchu, they too received daily rations of leaves. This was not for pleasure, it was fuel. It suppressed the torment of hunger, numbing the ache of exhaustion, and warding off the ravages of altitude sickness. The empire's arteries were its road network, and its lifeblood was the chki, the imperial couriers. These men were the Inca Empire's network. Through a relay system, they could carry messages from Quito to Cusco in under a week, spanning over 1,000 miles. They sprinted relentlessly from one stone sentry post to the next, with coca leaves as their eternal companions. These leaves granted them the entrance to conquer mountain passes, and enabled them to run until their lungs burned, to deliver the message before the emperor's decree expired. Spanish clergy arriving in 15th Tito witnessed the spectacle. Through the rigid lens of their own faith, they saw only idol worship. Catholic priests declared it a tool of the devil, an obstacle to conversion. Early decrees sought to ban its cultivation and use entirely, but this moral certainty soon collided with a greater force: the economy. The Spanish came to the New World not for souls. The Spaniards came to the New World not for souls, but for silver. And deep beneath the earth, at hellish elevations of 13,000 feet. They discovered a mountain range made of silver. But to strip silver from this mountain's belly, they needed labor, an endless supply of disposable labor. They adopted and distorted the Encom system, forcing tens of thousands of indigenous men into dark, suffocating mines. The work was brutal and relentless. The environment was deadly. Miners perished in cave miner sins, mercury poisoning during smelting, and sheer exhaustion. The Spaniards swiftly and pragmatically grasped a truth the Incas had long known. Coca leaves could doctor people beyond the limits of human endurance. Miners used this to feed their workers less, squeeze their labor more ruthlessly, and extract more silver at lower operational cost. Thus the church collapsed entirely. Those priests who once denounced cocoa as the devil's work now became owners of cocoa plantations. This leaf, once regarded as a sacred privilege, became a wage and a tool of colonial oppression. This leaf became the lubricant that turned the wheels, channeling the wealth of the Andes into the Spanish royal treasury, fueling the golden age of an empire half a world away. For 3 centuries, the coca leaf remained perched on mountain peaks, both a local sacrament and a local lament. Its true power lay locked within, awaiting the key of foreign curiosity to turn. And this key was not turned in temples, but in laboratories. In the early 19th century, European science was in the throes of discovery, dissecting nature and cataloging its components. Botanists and chemists were fascinated by potent nitrogen minus containing compounds in plants. They had already isolated morphine from the opium poppy, extracted quinine from chinchilla bark, and extracted caffeine from coffee beans. When plain, dried bundles of cocoa leaves first arrived in Europe, scientific curiosity naturally turned to this new target. In 1855, German chemist Friedrich Gerd successfully isolated brewed yellow substance, naming it red-white morphine. However, the process was inefficient, and the product lacked purity. The breakthrough finally came 5 years later, in 1860, in the quiet university town of Göttingen. Albert Neumann, a graduate student studying under the renowned chemist Friedrich Wöhler, refined the process through meticulous chemical washing and distillation. He successfully extracted a pure crystalline alkaloid substance, a white, bitter-tasting crystal. In his thesis, he described placing just a few crystals on the tip of the tongue, induced a temporary numbing sensation. He named this new substance with a scientific designation derived from the plant's name and the standard alkaloid suffix cocaine. Yet the world did not immediately heed this discovery. The finding languished in academic journals, becoming a footnote in the annals of chemistry. Its reemergence into public consciousness stemmed not from science, but from commerce and a glass of wine. Angelo Mariani, a Corsican merchant in Paris, had a flash of inspiration. He recognized the fatigue and anxiety plaguing Europe's populace, and their craving for a scientifically validated tonic to restore vitality. In 1863, he began importing tons of premium Peruvian coca leaves to steep in the finest Bordeaux wine. Using alcohol as a solvent, he extracted cocaine from the leaves, creating a potent and palatable elixir. He named this concoction Mariani wine. It immediately caused a sensation. Mariani was a marketing genius, and perhaps the first pioneer in this field. He gathered testimonials from prominent figures across society. Both Pope Leo X, and Pope Pius I endorsed it. Leo even awarded Mariani a gold medal from the Vatican. Queen Victoria sipped this elixir. Thomas Edison credited it for sustaining him through marathon invention sessions. Ulysses S. Grant sipped it while battling throat cancer during his memoir writing. Literary giants from Émile Zola to Jules Verne penned glowing reviews. Mariani advertisements plastered every street and alley, claiming this cocoa minus infused wine was the ultimate cure. for fatigue, depression, and exhaustion. It was hailed as the perfect tonic for the feverish energy of the clockwork era. Its logistics system was even more astonishing. A global supply chain stretching from the Andes Mountains to prison factories shipped millions of bottles of coca-infused wine to a world eager to taste it. America, ever eager to refine Europe's successful models, quickly followed suit. In Atlanta, Georgia, a pharmacist named John Stedman P. and E. battled his own demons. This Confederate veteran, wounded in the Civil War, was mired in a morphine addiction. This was common among veterans treated with potent painkillers, seeking a cure for addiction. Peyton, inspired by Marioni's success, developed Pemberton's French wine tonic. This essentially American version of Marioni tonic wine became wildly popular upon release. However, in 1886, Pemberton's business faced local opposition. Fulton County enacted prohibition. Alcohol was thus eliminated from the formula. Undeterred, Pemberton swiftly reformulated the recipe, replacing the alcohol base with syrup and carbonated water, adding caffeine-rich cola-nut extract for stimulation, while retaining the coca leaf extract. He named this prohibition-era innovation Coke-Cola. The elixir of life was born. This elixir was sold from soda fountains, touted as a cure for headaches, neurasthenia, and fatigue. Each cup contained a significant amount of cocaine, a fact the company naturally avoids mentioning today, but which was its core selling point at the time. As entrepreneurs intoxicated the masses, the medical community was hot on their heels. This was largely thanks to the passionate advocacy of a promising young Viennese neurologist, Sigmund Freud. 1884. Freud was still years away from developing psychoanalysis. As a struggling researcher, he craved a discovery that would bring both fame and fortune. After stumbling upon reports of cocaine's effects, he began experimenting on himself. A wave of euphoria swept through his body. In his groundbreaking paper on cocaine, he extolled the substance with rapturous language, declaring it a miracle cure for melancholy, an energizer that induced exhilaration and sustained pleasure without side effects. Most dangerously, he promoted cocaine as a cure for morphine addiction, administering it to patients, friends, and even his fiancée Martha, claiming it enhanced physical vigor and brought a rosy flush to the cheeks. Freud's immense scholarly authority conferred unprecedented legitimacy upon cocaine, transforming it from a mere component of common tonics into a rigorous therapeutic drug. His research inspired ophthalmologist Carl Kohler, prompting the latter to delve deeper into Newman's original observations on its anesthetic effects. Through a series of ingenious experiments, Kohler discovered that applying a cocaine solution to the eye could completely eliminate pain sensation. In 1884, he demonstrated this breakthrough first performing eye surgery on fully conscious animals, then extending the procedure to humans. The patient showed no signs of pain throughout the operation. The assembled physicians were astonished. Thus was born local anesthesia. It revolutionized surgical procedures, particularly in precision fields like ophthalmology and dentistry. Before cocaine's advent, such surgeries were either crude and rough, or required ether or chloroform to render patients unconscious. Now surgeons could operate on specific body parts with precision while patients remained awake and pain-free. During the final 2 decades of the 19th century, cocaine reigned supreme. As the miracle drug of the Victorian era, it was hailed as a modern panacea. American pharmaceutical company Park-Davis marketed cocaine in various forms: powder, cigarettes, subcutaneous injection kits containing vials of cocaine hydrochloride, even launching a soft drink named Coca-Cola. Cocaine throat lozenges designed for singers and orators were available on the market, alongside teething drops for infants. Medical journals extolled its efficacy, while popular magazines promoted it extensively. Millions believed they were merely taking scientifically validated, refined medicine to alleviate life's pressures. The leaves of the Andes were stripped of their soul, as their alkaloids were purified and amplified. Power poured into a world utterly intoxicated by promise, yet utterly blind to its cost. This glorious fall was as swift as its initial rise. Whispers of warning, once dismissed as anecdotes, suddenly rang like alarm bells. The miraculous solution gradually revealed its dark side. Physicians began reporting disturbing new symptoms among patient populations. More unsettling still, this phenomenon emerged with equal frequency among the medical community itself. Those who began using cocaine to combat depression or exhaustion found themselves unable to stop. Euphoria gave way to paranoid delusions, agitation and terrifying hallucination. The most common symptom, a crawling sensation beneath the skin. This phenomenon became known as cocaine crawls or formication. The promised boost in performance degenerated into compulsive repetition and a complete collapse of judgment. This miraculous drug was giving birth to a new and particularly vicious form of addiction. The most shocking case emerged from Sigmund Freud's social circle. He had enthusiastically treated his dear friend Dr. Ernst von Freland-Max for morphine addiction, prescribing large quantities of cocaine as therapy. The result was a catastrophe. Freland-Max traded one addiction for another far more destructive. He descended into full-blown cocaine psychosis, tormented by paranoid delusions, compounded by the constant torment of feeling white snakes crawling beneath his skin. Years later, he died a broken man. This experience left Freud deeply shaken. He ceased his public advocacy for cocaine and scarcely mentioned it thereafter. But the damage was done. The demon he had unleashed was now ravaging the lives of people across Europe and America. Driven by sensationalist media, a craving fresh thrills, public narratives began to reverse. Advertisements once extolling cocaine's virtues were now replaced by newspaper headlines screaming about its evils. Upper-class scandals, careers destroyed, fortunes squandered on white powder became commonplace. Yet moral panic took its most insidious and enduring form in America, where it became deliberately and irreversibly entangled with the nation's deep racial anxieties. Sensational and baseless rumors began circulating in the American South, claiming rampant cocaine abuse among African-American laborers. These tales were fabricated to stoke white fears. Newspapers published horrifying accounts, depicting cocaine-crazed blacks committing heinous crimes through superhuman strength and cunning. In 1914, the New York Times published a feature by Dr. Edward H. Williams, claiming cocaine made blacks sharper marksmen and rendered them temporarily immune to pistol bullets. Southern police even began equipping themselves with large -caliber revolvers, claiming greater stopping power was needed against these so-called drug-crazed maniacs. This was a meticulously crafted racial myth that distorted cocaine users, primarily white middle-class victims of a medical fad, into dangerous black criminal predators. Drugs were no longer merely personal vices, but threats to social order, catalysts for racial conflict, compelling the nation to adopt swift, hardline responses. The gears of federal regulation, turning slowly at first, began to accelerate. A pivotal early measure was the enactment of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, driven by investigative journalists exposing fraudulent ingredients in patented medicines. The act, while not banning any substances, mandated precise ingredient labeling. For the first time, companies had to list ingredients like alcohol, morphine, and cocaine on product packaging. The effect was immediate. Consumers discovered the soothing syrups given to their children contained opiate, and their favorite pick-me subtonics held massive amounts of cocaine. Faced with public outrage and sales crises, Many manufacturers quietly reformulated their products. As early as 1903, before the bill's passage, Coca-Cola, keenly sensing the shifting winds, had already removed active cocaine alkaloids from its signature beverage, substituting with D-alkaloid-ized coca leaf extract to preserve both brand name and flavor profile. Yet for the growing reformist movement, prohibition advocates and those stoking racial tensions, labeling alone filth, are short of satisfying their demands for total prohibition. The diplomatic stage provided the final impetus, seeking to expand its influence in Asia. The United States was eager to assist China in stemming the rampant opium epidemic, to gain the moral authority to lead international anti-drug conventions. America first had to clean up its own domestic drug affairs. This two-decade-long panic finally reached its peak here. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. This legislation was not an anti-drug law, but official measure disguised as tax legislation. To pass constitutional scrutiny, the act required all importers, manufacturers, sellers or distributors of cocaine and opium-based drugs to register with the federal government, pay special taxes, and use designated prescription forms. On the surface, it appeared to be a simple regulatory measure, yet its enforcement profoundly transformed American society. Treasury agents were ordered to enforce the bill's provisions with the utmost rigor. They ruled that prescribing narcotics to maintain addicts' dependency was not a legitimate medical practice. Physicians who continued prescribing faced harassment, arrests, and prosecution. Many were imprisoned. Under this threat, the medical community swiftly and completely withdrew from addiction treatment. The consequences were both profound and immediate. The legal supply of cocaine, once readily available at any pharmacy, vanished. Users who a decade earlier were viewed as patients or consumers are now legally redefined as criminals. The law did not stop cocaine use, but drove it underground. It closed the doors of pharmacies and soda bars, only to open a darker door, the one leading to back alleys, to illegal dealers in the vast, violent, and extremely lucrative black market. The era of cocaine as a medical miracle ended. Its reign as public enemy and fuel for a century of crime and conflict had only just begun. By legislative decree and righteous conviction, this crystalline powder was banished from the world. Though driven from pharmacies, sunlit counters and soda machines, cheerful fizz, it never vanished. Of course not. It merely returned home with different kinds of people. Prohibition, you see, rarely does it kill desire. It merely raises the price and curates the guest list. Thus cocaine, stripped of its medical legitimacy, underwent a remarkable metamorphosis. It became a secret, and secrets, especially widely known secrets, become the most coveted status symbol. This powder became the clandestine handshake of the new elite, a dazzling resonance for those walking the cutting edge or standing above the law. In the roaring 20s, this era drunk on bathtub gin and intoxicated by rebellion, cocaine was the perfect accessory. It was the ghost in the machine of the jazz age. In New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, within those underground bars shrouded in hazy blue smoke, as the frenzied Charleston steps shook the floors, a bottle of this exquisitely concealed elixir was your true credential to the inner circle. It was swift. It was avant-garde. It was utterly illegal. It embodied everything that era revered. For Bob-Head, flamboyant women, embracing new-found freedom. It was the elixir for dancing dawn to dawn for Wall Street speculators, when the market's unrelenting surge filled their pockets. It was the secret formula for feeling invincible like a portfolio. People whispered its existence in hushed tones, from dressing rooms in luxury hotels to the back seats of roaring limousines. It was the fuel for a party that never ended, a chemical guarantee, making this night, this decade, burn hotter and faster than any before. This secretive pleasure society naturally established its western chapter in the sun-baked town, where the nation's dreams are busily manufactured. Hollywood, in the flickering silent world of early cinema, pressure-weighed like mountains. Fortunes were made overnight. An unknown girl from Ohio could transform within months into a goddess worshipped by the gods. Her face projected 30 feet wide across the screen, drawing millions of admirers. The studio demanded actors maintain boundless energy and dazzling performances, beyond what mortals could endure, whether on or off screen. Within this crucible of fame, that white powder found its perfect home. People called it girl sugar or nose sugar. This dizzying nickname was actually a playful moniker, coined by demanding chemical mistresses. It became the stimulant before all night shoots under scorching spotlights, the social lubricant at wild parties at Laurel Canyon Estates, and the silent accomplice to countless meaty or crises and tragic falls of stardom. When idol Wallace Reed, injured on set, succumbed to morphine addiction and was officially declared dead at 20-3, the curtain was lifted just enough for the public to glimpse the rot beneath the glamour. This scandal sent studio executives into a panic. Their fear stemmed not from loss of life, but from the threat to box office profit. The industry hastily enacted the Hays Code, a moral framework that merely buried secrets deeper underground. For those who could afford it, it became all the more alluring. This powder belonged not only to hedonists, but circulated among thinkers, circulated among writers and artists. In the Bahamian enclaves of Greenwich Village and the smoke-filled cafes of post-war Paris, cocaine was not a party favor, but a key unlocking perception. It shattered mediocrity and fueled the creative engine of lonely dawns. For surrealist painters, it offered fleeting, fragmented visions. For novelists wrestling with American literary epics, it became the conduit for words to flow unceasingly, breaching the barriers of fatigue and doubt. It was regarded as a tool, a cerebral stimulant that sharpened the mind, stripping away layers of reality. Of course, this was merely a beautiful and dangerous illusion. The creativity it seemed to ignite is often merely chaotic, scattered energy, so minus cold, profound insight is nothing but self, minus referential gibberish born of chemical chaos within the mind. Yet the power of myth is immense. It cloaks drugs in an aura of intellectual solemnity, elevating them to sacraments of the avant-garde. And who supplies this underground world, who connects Hollywood starlets with Parisian poets. It is the criminal underworld. Those shrewd merchants running bootleg empires naturally sniffed out the perfect opportunity for product diversification. Men like New York's godfather Arnold Rothstein reportedly rigged the 1919 World Series, well versed in the simple rules of the criminal economy. Cocaine is a luxury, low volume, high profit, easy to transport. It didn't require convoys or massive warehouses like illicit spirits. Just a few well-placed smugglers and a discreet distribution network to serve society's wealthiest, most influential echelons. The supply chain was still primitive back then, relying largely on legal pharmaceuticals transshipped from Europe or sporadic contraband from South America. But the foundation was laid. Demand had crystallized. Cocaine found its new niche, a forbidden luxury, a powder that separated the audacious, the fallen, and the degenerate from the mundane world. It promised vitality, talent, and belonging, an exceedingly costly promise, initially paid for in cash. It would inevitably demand other forms of payment. While the glamorous youth of the North revel in the powder's illicit thrills, cocaine's story truly begins under the thin, high sun of the Andes in the distant south. For centuries, the relationship between Peru's and Bolivia's indigenous peoples and the coca leaf had nothing to do with decadence. It was a matter of survival. They chewed coca leaf, often mixed with a pinch of ash or lime to release the alkaloids, to sustain labor at harsh altitude, to stave off hunger, and for ritual and medicine. The coca leaf was a gift from the gods. This sacred plant had woven itself into the cultural fabric, as common and indispensable as the potato, a mild stimulant, and an integral part of the terroir. The journey of this sacred leaf into a global commodity wove together chapters of chemistry, ambition, and geography. The story began between the ancient agricultural bounty of the Andes and the world's growing, feverish demand, not the flamboyant drug lords of later legend, rather than the flamboyant drug lords of later legend. Mid-20th century, the first true pioneers of the international cocaine trade began to emerge. They were not the ostentatious drug lords of later legend, but shrewd, calculating merchants who often operated in the shadow. The hub of this emerging industry was not initially Colombia, but rather Chile, with its long coastline. In cities like Valparaiso and Santiago, smugglers who had honed their skills in other illicit ventures sensed an opportunity. A pivotal figure was a Chilean woman known as Ad Renée the Godmother. Using a restaurant as cover, she established the first major drug trafficking network in the 1960s. Her organization was remarkably sophisticated for its time, not only transporting the product, but also controlling the production process. The methods they developed became the blueprint for the entire industry. This sinister alchemy transformed emerald leaves into white powder. First, coca leaves harvested by Peru farmers in remote valleys of Peru and Bolivia, were transported to crude, hidden pits in the jungle. The leaves were soaked in gasoline or kerosene, and then trampled barefoot into a paste. This slurry was then mixed with acidic substances and other chemicals to extract the raw cocaine alkaloid, forming a coarse grayish-white substance known as coca paste or coca paste. This paste is a crucial intermediate product. It is more concentrated and potent than the original leaves, making it easier to smuggle across borders. Coca paste is loaded onto dilapidated small planes and flown from the jungles of Bolivia and Peru to the desert regions of northern Chile. There, in secret laboratories, oft a little more than makeshift shacks or hidden basements, where the final, meticulous refinement takes place, chemical masters, including many professionally trained individuals, use volatile chemical mixtures like ether and acetone to purify the coca paste. They repeatedly wash away impurities until only sparkling, pure hydrochloric acid cocaine crystals remain. This process is both dangerous and foul-smelling. A single misstep or spark could detonate the entire facility, yet the profits are staggering. A kilogram of coke, a paste purchased for hundreds of dollars in Bolivian jungles, can be refined into pure cocaine worth thousands. Upon reaching San Diego, it commands tens of thousands. In U.S. or European markets, its value becomes astronomical. Early Chilean drug lords pioneered transportation networks, airlifting finished product to Central American and Caribbean transit hubs, or employing mules, human carriers, to smuggle small quantities aboard commercial flights. They were establishing the embryonic form of a multinational supply chains entered on a single potent product. Yet history intervened at this moment. In 1973, General Augusto Pinochet's military coup overthrew Chile's socialist government, led by Salvador Allende. During the brutal crackdown that followed, Pinochet's new regime showed zero tolerance for independent criminal organizations. Many veteran drug lords were arrested, executed, or forced into exile. Chile's supply chain was severed. Yet demand for cocaine in the United States and Europe did not wane. Instead, it grew exponentially. A market vacuum emerged, and markets, especially black markets, have always abhorred a vacuum. This industrial chain, from extracting coca paste to exporting finished products, urgently needed a new foothold. That base was found in a nation north along the coastline, a country with a long history of smuggling, with a weak central government, and a population of ambitious, ruthless youth, hungry for wealth and power. That nation was Colombia. The entire cocaine trade pivoted northward. This move set the stage for an unprecedented explosion of violence and wealth worldwide. The low-key, pragmatic smuggling model of the Chilean era was about to be replaced by a far more terrifying system. This machine was nearing completion. It was not built by Colombia's traditional elite, but by the rugged, striving middle class from cities like Medellin. They grew up harboring resentment and defiance, witnessing old money families orchestrating the nation's fate from exclusive clubs and estates. They viewed cocaine not as a social scourge, but as a historic opportunity, a vehicle for violent upward mobility. At the core of this new breed of drug entrepreneurs stood a figure whose name became synonymous with the drug itself, Pablo Antonio Escobar Giffer. Escobar was neither a chemical genius nor a logistics master, at least not initially. His genius lay in vision and unflinching audacity. He began his career in Medellin's filthy underworld, stealing cars, smuggling cigarettes, running kidnapping miners for ransom rings. He was pragmatic and ruthless. He instinctively grasped the two levers driving the world, fear and desire. When the cocaine trade began shifting from Chile, Escobar saw not just an opportunity to participate, he glimpsed a chance to dominate. He understood true wealth lay not in moving a few kilograms of product, but in controlling the entire production chain from leaf to street. It lay in industrializing the entire process. He and his associates formed the legendary Medellin cartel. This atypical organizational structure resembled a loose, yet formidable drug trafficking alliance. Members collaborated to maximize profits and protect their commercial territory. Among them were the A brothers, born into a horse breeding family, or Luis, Juan David, and Fabio Jr., who infused the enterprise with old world business acumen. Also present was Carlos El Liran Lillo, a talented yet eccentric and volatile German, Colombian. He simultaneously idolized John Lennon and Adolf Hitler. Lillo's outstanding contribution lay in logistics. He acquired the Bahamian island of Norman's Cay, transforming it into a premier smuggling base. The island featured a runway, radar systems, and refrigerated warehouses. From this private theft outpost, a mere short flight from Florida's coast, the drug cartel could send plane after plane loaded with cocaine directly to the insatiable American market. Escobar and his associates applied industrial capitalist principles to their criminal enterprise. They implemented vertical integration, funding coca cultivation in Peru and Bolivia, to ensure a steady supply of raw materials, constructing vast laboratory complexes deep within the Colombian jungle, known as super labs. These were no crude shacks, but microminus cities, equipped with aircraft hangars, dormitories for hundreds of workers, kitchens, generators and sophisticated chemical processing equipment. At facilities like the Tranquilo base, they could produce 10 to 20 tons of pure cocaine weekly. Tons of production. The scale was almost unimaginable. They had long transcended the role of smugglers, becoming manufacturers on astonishingly efficient production lines, crafting commodities for the global market. The logistics system transporting the product was equally audacious. Fleets of small aircraft, each carrying hundreds of kilograms of cargo, fly from Colombia to Cape Normans, or drop waterproof packed shipments into the ocean to be retrieved by speedboats. They even invest in submarines. These crude diesel powered vessels can transport 1 or 2 tons of cocaine underwater, making them nearly undetectable by law enforcement. The issue of money proves even more challenging. The sheer scale of the profits became a logistical challenge in itself. Billions of dollars in cash, mostly small bills for street sales in the U.S., had to be transported back to Colombia. Cash was stuffed into suitcases, crammed into private jet landing gear, and hidden inside televisions and refrigerators. The cartel spent thousands of dollars monthly just on rubber bands to bundle stacks of cash. At his peak, Pablo Escobar's personal fortune was estimated at tens of billions of dollars, making him one of the world's wealthiest individuals. His financial power even surpassed that of many nations. The staggering wealth brought staggering power. Escobar intended to use it to subjugate all of Colombia to his will. His business strategy was simple and clear, and articulated with chilling clarity: silver coins or lead bullets on a silver platter. Any police officer, judge, politician, or journalist who stood in his way faced a choice: accept bribed silver and turn a blind eye to build their own fortunes, or refuse the offer. This was an industrial minor-scale campaign of corruption and terror. The cartel systematically infiltrated every level of the Colombian government. Judges on their payroll dismissed all charges against them. They bribed high-ranking police officers to escort their shipments, and manipulated politicians to block any legislation threatening their interests. The most notorious example was the extradition treaty signed with the United States, which the drug lords feared more than Colombian prisons. Escobar himself, in a shockingly audacious move, was elected as a Colombian congressional alternate in 1982 to gain legitimacy and judicial immunity through this position. Yet when charm and money failed, the drug cartel resorted to bullets. Their brutal tactics plunged Colombia into a state of civil war in 1984. Rodrigo Bonilla, the attorney general who dared to expose Escobar and strip him of his congressional immunity, was shot dead in his car in Bogota. In 1989, Luis Carlos Galen, the charismatic presidential candidate whose campaign centered on combating drug cartels and who held the clearest path to victory, was assassinated at a public rally. They also planted a bomb on Aviacan Flight 203, attempting to assassinate another presidential candidate, Cesar Gaviria, who had not boarded the flight, resulting in the deaths of all 107 passengers on board. They detonated a massive truck bomb outside the Colombian Administrative Department of Security, the AS headquarters, killing 70 people and injuring hundreds more. This was no longer mere crime, but narco-terrorism. These actions transcended ordinary gang activity and constituted the behavior of a parallel state, a corporate entity with its own army and foreign policy, waging war against a sovereign nation. Under Pablo Escobar's leadership, the Medellin cartel transformed ordinary coca leaves into weapons of mass disruption. The machine they built produced not only drugs, but an empire forged from corruption, addiction, and fear. This empire operated on a ceaseless northbound river of white powder, holding an entire nation hostage, forcing its people to face the daily choice of silver bullets or bullets, while global cameras and headlines fixated on the Medellin cartel's volcanic, almost theatrical violence. Hundreds of kilometers away in Cali, the city of sunlight, a radically different organization was quietly consolidating its power. If Pablo Escobar was the drug warlord, the incarnation of openly brutal chaos, Cali's rivals were more modern, and in many ways more insidious. They resembled the boardrooms of multinational corporations, whose primary product just happened to be cocaine. Calling themselves the gentlemen of Cali, they crafted their image with extreme sophistication. Their methods lay not in car bombs or public assassinations, but in silent bribery, manipulating politicians, and buying off judges. They understood a fundamental truth: Escobar's arrogance often overlooked truth, lies not in the ability to blow up buildings, but in ensuring no one faces prosecution for it. This drug cartel was a criminal syndicate, composed of folk or figures, each playing distinct roles. At the apex were brothers Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguezola. The elder Gilberto, dubbed the chess player, served as the cartel's strategist, visionary, and the public face of their legitimate enterprises. He navigated Colombia's highest social circles with ease. As a revered banker and philanthropist, his brother Miguel was the operations engine. This CIO managed the day-to-day logistics of a global drug empire. Low-key, yet ruthless, he was the iron fist beneath Gilberto's velvet glove. The commercial empire the brothers built began with a chain of pharmacies that appeared harmless. They gradually expanded into banking, real estate, and even owned the city's most popular soccer team, America Dolly. These weren't mere fronts. They were lucrative, legitimate businesses. They brought immense social and political capital to the brothers. More crucially, they provided the perfect money, minus laundering infrastructure for the billions about to flood in. The other two partners each had their roles. Elmer Herrera, nicknamed Pacho, was a logistics and distribution genius. From Cali's headquarters, he orchestrated a complex transport network to move cocaine out of Colombia. More crucially, he controlled a vast and intricate distribution network within the United States, especially in New York City. The fourth member was Jose Sant, a cruise loan owner, known as Chape, serving as the cartel's ambassador and pioneer. As early as the late 1970s and early 1980s, it was Santa Cruz who personally traveled to New York to establish the foundation for the cartel's U.S. operations. He was not a thug breaking down doors, but a businessman opening accounts, leasing warehouses, and forging alliances. He understood the American market better than anyone, its operational rhythms, its demand pulses, and its fatal weaknesses. The Cali model was built on intelligence and infiltration. Their investment in technology and human intelligence far exceeded that of street-level enforcers. Their counterintelligence capabilities were legendary, rivaling that of a national government. They systematically bribed employees of the Colombian Telecommunications Company to monitor nearly all communications entering and leaving Cali. Police officers, military officers, politicians, journalists all appeared on their payroll. Spies were everywhere. If a lawyer considered taking on an anti-drug case, they might receive a polite phone call detailing their children's route to school that very morning. No explicit threat was needed. The message was clear. This fog of silence and complicity made them untouchable. Unlike Escobar, who stood above the law, they operated from within the system, breaking free of legal constraints until it yielded to them. Their logistical innovations were equally masterful. While the Medellin cartel still relied on suitcases or small planes, the Cali cartel had embraced industrial minor-scale thinking. They mastered the art of hiding a tree in a forest, dissolving cocaine in chemical agents, blending it into legitimate cargo, concealing it within hollowed minus-out timber, mixing it into coffee bean shipments, or sealing it within concrete fence posts, then shipping entire container loads into the United States through construction companies under their control. Dismantling these shipments required industrial equipment and chemical processing far beyond standard customs inspection capabilities. Their most ingenious act involved shipping thousands of boxes of frozen broccoli to Miami. Among legitimate agricultural products, they concealed replacement boxes containing broccoli replaced with exquisite green replicas made from pure cocaine. To curious DEA agents, this appeared merely as one ordinary tray among thousands of standard frozen vegetable pallets in a cold storage facility. They elevated money laundering to an art form, through a global financial network comprising intricate shell companies, Panamanian and Caribbean offshore banks, and legitimate enterprises. They laundered illicit funds until indistinguishable from legitimate capital. They employed elite lawyers and accountants to study and exploit loopholes in international financial regulations. After Escobar's death, the cartel reached its zenith in the early 1990s, with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration estimating it controlled 80% of the world's cocaine supply. They operated as a silent, efficient, vertically integrated monopoly, like a shadow government. Their influence stretched from coca fields in the Andes to Bogota's highest corridors of power. Their product was delivered with corporate precision to markets craving it. But where did these meticulously packaged, industrially transported, professionally laundered powders actually flow? They converged into a torrential white river rushing north toward a nation with arms wide open and wallets wide open. The United States of the late 1970s and 1980s was undergoing profound cultural transformation. The shadow of the Vietnam War and the cynicism of Watergate were giving way to new ambitions. The era of consumerism and self minus gratification. The era of guilt minus free indulgence. This was the Reagan era. The era when greed is good. The era of Wall Street titans and Hollywood blockbusters. This was the age of speed, success, and status. And cocaine seemed designed in laboratories for this very moment, as the perfect fuel. Unlike the marijuana and psychedelics of the 1960s counterculture, drugs associated with withdrawal and expanded consciousness, cocaine was the drug of the ambitious. It was made for winners. It didn't slow you down. It only sharpens you. It doesn't invite contemplation. It only fuels confidence. It promises to make you sharper, more energetic, more creative, more powerful. For those relentless, young urban professionals climbing the corporate ladder, cocaine is the ultimate accessory. The pure white confidence gotten snorted in a bathroom stall before a crucial presentation. A stimulant dabbed on gums before high minus stakes negotiation. In Wall Street's frenzied trading floors, it fuels brokers through 20-hour shifts, enabling them to bark orders into phones, process dizzying data streams, and celebrate massive profits with equally wild parties. In Hollywood studios' private back rooms, multi-million-dollar deals sealed on glass tables dusted with white powder. It was the screenwriter's meal, the rock star's rocket fuel, and the secret indulgence of actors whose perfect smiles graced magazine covers. This drug shed its back minus Sally stigma, stepping into the spotlight of the elite. This transformation was most evident at the legendary nightclub Studio 54. This New York landmark was the epicenter of 1970s disco hedonism. Behind the velvetropes, celebrities, fashion, art, and finance collided in a meticulously curated world of nightly extravagant feasts. Cocaine was the heart of this revelry. It was passed around on silver platters like an appetizer. The club's iconic Moonman logo, that face with a silver spoon pressed to its nose, was a blatant nod to its drug of choice. Here cocaine wasn't a dirty secret, but the social lubricant fueling the glittering machine. It symbolized the badge of success in ascending to high society. Even the drug paraphernalia itself became a status symbol. Gold razor blades for cutting perfect lines, ornate silver spoons for discreet consumption, polished mirrors and marble slabs transformed into vessels. These consumption rituals were revered as a fetish, performing a spectacle of refined excess. Pop culture both mirrors and amplifies this allure. Films like Scarface, though cautionary tales, fashionably depict the wealth and power of drug lords. Radio songs hinted at or openly referenced the white horse and white snow fueling nightlife. Cocaine was omnipresent in fleeting, intoxicating moments. cocaine transcended its status as mere narcotics. It became a cultural phenomenon, a synonym for success, and a sacrament of ambition. This new religion, this insatiable demand spawned a staggering feedback loop. The more cocaine America consumed, the greater the southbound flow of capital, and the more capital flowed, the more formidable and sophisticated Colombia's drug cartels grew. The gentlemen of Cole's cartels observed this demand explosion without the fervor of street dealers, but with the cold calculation of market analysts. They expanded production capacity, optimized logistics, and streamlined distribution system, all to serve the most premium and profitable clientele. America represented an unprecedentedly vast market, and they monopolized the supply of the most fashionable commodity. The profits were unimaginable, enough to buy armies, overthrow governments, reshape entire economies. Yet this glory was built upon a chemical substance, and that chemical was about to be redesigned. The essence of luxury is exclusivity. Market laws, like chemical laws, show no mercy. Someone would always find a way to make the champagne of the drug world affordable to all. They succeeded, and the storm unleashed by this act will tear apart the very foundations of American society. Its chemical principle is brutally simple. No sophisticated laboratories or professional chemists are needed. Only household pots and common ingredients suffice. Mixing expensive hydrochloric cocaine powder with simple alkaline substances like baking soda and a small amount of water, then heating it, causes the cocaine to separate from its hydroxide structure. As the mixture cools, psychoactive cocaine base precipitates into crystals, hardening into fine granular or rock-like formations. The evaporation of water produces a distinctive crackling sound, giving the new substance its name crack. This simple chemical transformation changed everything. First, it altered the route of administration. Unlike powder that must be inhaled, crack is heated and inhaled. Inhaling vaporized cocaine delivers the drug to the brain within seconds via the lungs' vast surface area. The resulting euphoria is far more intense and immediate than nasal snorting. A full minus body explosion of pleasure. Users describe the tsunami minus like surge of dopamine as an unprecedented ultimate climax. Yet this astonishing peak radically fades almost instantly. The intense euphoria lasts only 5 to 10 minutes, immediately replaced by an equally intense crash, plunging into depression, anxiety, and a desperate craving to relive the peak experience. This rapid cycle of extreme highs and crushing lows spawned unprecedented speed and intensity of addiction. Those who had only ever tried powder cocaine often found themselves trapped in the hopeless vortex of cocaine after just a few snorts. The second, and perhaps most crucial transformation occurred on the economic front. By the mid-1980s, a gram of powdered cocaine sold for about $100 on the street. For many, especially residents of impoverished neighborhoods, this price was prohibitively high. It was essentially a luxury item. Crack cocaine shattered this economic barrier. The same weight of powder could be cooked into dozens of rock, each selling for as little as $2, $3, or $5. This was the pivotal shift, a twisted stroke of marketing genius. Drugs became democratized. Their price threshold made them accessible to nearly everyone. This opened up vast untapped markets in America's inner cities. These communities had already been hollowed out by decades of downward spoliation, white flight, and systemic neglect. The storm swept through neighborhoods in New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, and Washington, D.C. The emergence of cheap, smokable cocaine spawned a terrifying new economic ecosystem. Formerly local corner stores and children's playgrounds transformed overnight into 24/7 open-air drug markets. A new generation of street gangs emerged, heavily armed, waging brutal turf wars to control this lucrative trade. Violence escalates rapidly. Secret deals in nightclub restrooms are replaced by shootouts in residential neighborhoods. Community social structures begin to crumble. Abandoned or squatted apartments, crack houses, become symbols of societal collapse. All social norms disintegrate completely here. Addicts destroy families. Parents sell household belongings, or even themselves for 5 minutes of euphoria. Children are left in a state of neglect. An entire generation of children is born to drug-addicted mothers. Amidst the moral panic frenzy, the media coined the term cocaine babies. It painted a terrifying picture of a generation of infants born with lifelong disabilities. This terrifying image was often exaggerated, although subsequent medical research confirmed that long-term effects are more complex than early reports, and less widespread than initially feared. These children born into chaos, poverty, and trauma indeed faced devastating social circumstances. The response from media and government was not driven by public health concerns, but rather a declaration of war. Evening news was saturated with sensationalist reports of cocaine-fueled violence and urban decay, often tinged with racial undertones. Drug users were no longer Wall Street playboys or Hollywood stars, but young, aggressive black men. This media narrative fueled nationwide panic. Politicians eager to demonstrate toughness pushed for harsh legislation. The most influential was the 1980s Anti-Drug Abuse Act, rushed through amid pre-election hysteria. This legislation enshrined staggering sentencing disparities into federal law. The law stipulated that possession of just 5 grams of crack cocaine would trigger the same 5-year mandatory minimum sentence as possession of 500 grams of powder cocaine. The infamous 100-to-1 sentencing ratio. Its logic, if it could be called, that was that crack cocaine was more addictive and linked to greater violence, and thus warrants harsher punishment. The actual consequences of this law proved disastrous and profoundly discriminatory. Expensive powder cocaine users, predominantly white and middle class, rarely faced arrest for mere possession. Conversely, the typical users and low-level dealers of cheap, junky crack cocaine are predominantly impoverished African Americans, who became targets of aggressive street-level enforcement. The result was the mass incarceration of an entire generation of young black men, and a dramatic surge in the U.S. prison population. Families were not only shattered by addiction, but also destroyed by a punitive justice system. Fathers, sons, and brothers were incarcerated for years or even decades for nonviolent drug offenses. The law failed to curb the flow of drugs, but succeeded in shattering already fragile communities, deepening cycles of poverty, and breeding profound, enduring feelings of injustice. Thus the story of cocaine in America evolved into a parable of two starkly different worlds, divided by chemical composition and class status. In Manhattan Mansions, it remains a secret, yet dangerous pleasure, a powder igniting ambition and excess, but in South Bronx public housing, its cheap, inhalable form became a symbol of social decay, spanning a drug war that was essentially a war on the poor. Like two sides of the same white coin, once eyed revered as fuel for the elite, the other demonized as poison for the underclass. This is the ultimate tragic portrait of a powder that for a century deceived the world with promises of power, only to bring ruin. The gentleman studying spreadsheets and financial statements in college likely seldom considers the concrete form the product takes when it reaches American consumers. To them, it's merely market share and a game of paper numbers, but the numbers on the streets tell a very different story about chemistry, about economics, and about a tragedy unfolding deep within America. Thus, on the grand stage of public policy, a new and terrifying act begins. That glittering white powder, once the darling of intellectuals and the fuel of high society, has mutated into a more destructive new form. Boiled with baking soda and water, it transforms into a hard, cheap substance that can even be snorted. This substance is called crack. Like a ghostly inferno, it sweeps through America's inner cities, leaving social wreckage in its wake. The media never misses an opportunity to stoke panic. Each night, images of so-called cocaine babies and chaotic urban landscape fuel the flames to a fever pitch. The public demands action. In Washington, a city driven by both fear and opportunity, the response is swift. The enemy is no longer personal vice or social malaise, but an existential threat. A declaration of war was imperative. This wasn't the first time the term had been invoked. Richard Nixon had proposed it earlier in his career, but the war he proclaimed was merely bureaucratic affairs of treatments, enters and committees. The war escalated in the 1980s due to the cocaine crisis was entirely different. This was a real war, with battlefields, soldiers, and death tolls. Like the beginning of many such campaigns, it started with a document, the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, born from a tangled web of moral conviction and electoral calculation. It stands as a masterpiece of legislative fury. Its core principle, mandatory minimum sentencing. The subtle art of judicial discretion was cast aside, replaced by a rigid, brutal arithmetic formula. Possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine, equivalent to 2 packets of sugar, guaranteed a minimum of 5 years in federal prison. To receive an equivalent sentence for powder cocaine, the drug of choice for affluent white suburbanites, one would need to be caught with 500 grams. The legally prescribed sentencing disparity reached 100-fold. Its logic was simple, yet fatally flawed. Crack cocaine was deemed more addictive, more violent, more urban. This law targeted not just a drug, but a specific community. The gears of the state machine began turning, crushing with new and terrifying force. The line between law enforcement and military action blurred. Military equipment, originally destined for overseas battlefields, began flowing from trickles into torrents, into local police department armories, armored personnel carriers, M16 rifles, flashbangs. Friendly neighborhood cops were replaced by new images, warriors clad in black Kevlar vests and bulletproof helmets, fully equipped, poised for small scale incursions. The primary tactic of this new war is no raids. In the dead of night, doors shatter, family members are thrown to the floor, homes ransacked, in search of crystalline rocks or white powder. This war is not fought in trenches, but in living rooms and bedrooms across the nation. Like any conventional war, it has overseas battlefields. Its logic is simple: supply minus side economics viewed through the lens of military strategist. If domestic demand is insatiable, the only solution is to choke off the source of supply. All eyes turn to the verdant valleys of the Andes and the steamy jungles of the Amazon basin, where the humble coca leaf grows. Through the DA and the CIA began pouring billions of dollars into Latin America. This policy was given the clean, almost agricultural sounding name of eradication, but its execution was anything but clean. Low flying aircraft, oft unpiloted by U.S. contractors, swept over the countryside of Colombia and Peru, spraying a fine mist of glyphosate herbicide. This chemical mixture, known as Roundup, was specifically designed to eradicate coca plants. It achieved its goal, but it was indiscriminate. Crops like coffee and bananas suffered equally. Water sources were poisoned. Livestock fell ill. This forced subsistence farmers who depended solely on coca who grew it purely because it was the only crop that could sustain their livelihoods, into deeper poverty. Ultimately, they fell into the arms of the very drug lords the program sought to combat. Simultaneously, the U.S. armed and trained local military forces, transforming the National Army into drug enforcement agents. They built radar stations, supplied Black Hawk helicopters, shared intelligence to hunt down so-called drug kingpins. The primary weapon of this foreign policy was extradition, chained and transported north, tried in U.S. courts, far from able judges and intimidated witnesses. This fear became the drug lord's true nightmare. Pablo Escobar, the king of Medellin, infamously declared he'd rather be buried in Colombia than imprisoned in an American jail. To this end, he waged a bloody terror war against his own government, bombing passenger planes, assassinating presidential candidates. His rivals in the cartel became primary targets. Television screens were flooded with the faces of these enemies, possessing immense wealth yet committing murder with impunity. They were the perfect villains in this global drama. This strategy seemed to work slowly and painstakingly, through relentless pursuit, combined with internal divisions and bloody gunfights. The large-scale drug cartels of late 20th century Colombia were finally dismantled. In 1993, Escobar was shot dead on a rooftop in Medellin. Years later, the leaders of the cartel were either captured or surrendered. From the White House Situation Room to the field offices of the DA in Bogota, the scent of victory filled the air. The serpent's head had been severed, yet no one questioned where its body would go. No one noticed that while they fought one war, they inadvertently created perfect conditions for another, more ferocious beast to rise from the ashes. The old system possessed a brutal clarity. Colombians, the Medellin and Cali drug cartels were producers and wholesalers. From jungle cocaine paste labs to northbound shipments by the ton, they controlled the entire process. But they had a fatal weakness. The most dangerous leg of the journey, the 954-mile U.S. Mexico border. This porous, treacherous frontier, strewn with deserts, scrub and shallow rivers, was a territory they neither knew nor could control. To complete this final transport, they needed specialists. They needed subcontractors. So they turned to organizations that had smuggled across the border for generations. Small smuggling families from Sinaloa, Chihuahua, and Baja California, who understood the foundations and rhythms of border patrol, and knew the corrupt nature of officials on both sides. The initial agreement was simple: Mexicans charged a fixed fee per service, earning thousands of dollars in cash for every kilogram of cocaine successfully transported into the United States. They were drug carriers, truck drivers, mules, purely logistical personnel, nothing more. The first to grasp the true potential of this model was Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, a former judicial police officer from Sinaloa, known as El Padrino, the Godfather. Unlike Escobar, he wasn't flashy or bloodthirsty. He was a businessman, a visionary. He understood that true power lay not in drug production, but in controlling the pathways to market. He consolidated fragmented smuggling groups into a tight alliance, the Guadalajara cartel. He controlled the gateways to the American dream, those lucrative smuggling corridors. This system once benefited all parties. Colombians gained reliable transport networks, while the Felix Gallardo organization amassed vast wealth through transportation fees. However, as the U.S. and Colombian governments launched relentless manhunts against Escobar and the Rodriguez brothers, the pressure of the war on drugs began shifting the balance. Their operational systems crumbled. Cash flows were blocked, driven to desperation. In their desperation, they gave Felix Gallardo and his associates an opening. The Mexicans began altering the terms of the deal. They no longer accepted cash. cash was bulky and difficult to launder. They craved more valuable compensation, a share of the product itself, to replace fees. They began demanding physical payment starting at 35% of each cocaine shipment, rising to 40%, to a final 50% cut. This was nothing short of a strategic miracle, a silent revolution in the underworld. This move fundamentally repositioned the Mexican organizations. They were no longer mere couriers transporting goods. They now owned their own inventory, capable of direct product sales, wholesalers with direct access to the world's largest consumer market. They began establishing exclusive distribution networks in U.S. cities, completely severing Colombian middlemen's involvement. The collapse of Colombia's major drug cartels, though viewed by Washington as a landmark victory, spawned an epic power vacuum, and this void was being filled by newly emerging Mexican drug alliances. In 1989, Felix Gallardo was captured amid a political storm triggered by the torture and murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena. Yet this failed to dismantle the drug miners trafficking machine he had built. Instead, it fragmented into independently operating factions. Today, each branch functions as a separate power. The former Guadalajara cartel has fragmented into the drug syndicates we see today. The Northwest is controlled by the ambitious and violent Alano minus Felix brothers, who hold the Tijuana stronghold. This high miners' profit gateway to California, the central region, is dominated by Amado Cuevas Fuentes, who controls the Ciudad Juarez stronghold. He earned the moniker King of the Skies by airlifting came directly from Colombia using his fleet of Boeing 727 seconds. Meanwhile, in the Sinaloa highlands, a short yet boundless lie ambitious farmer's son, Wim Guzman Lora, nicknamed El Chapo Guzman, began consolidating power with his associates, gradually forming what would become the Sinaloa cartel. The power structure had irreversibly shifted. The once minus and challenged Colombian drug lords, now reduced to mere suppliers, forced to sell drugs to the Mexicans or cartel. Mexicans now controlled the entire logistics chain north of Colombia. They controlled the source, prices and profits. They were no longer subcontractors, but board members. A new drug empire had risen, with its Vatican in Culiacan and diocese stretching to Tijuana, Juarez, and Matamoros. They were wealthier, more cunning, and more entrenched than their Colombian predecessors. The war to eliminate the Collie and Medell in drug lords did not end the drug dynasty, merely paved the way for a more powerful new dynasty to ascend. The United States spent a decade and billions of dollars slaying one dragon, only to discover it had created a 9-headed serpent. And this new monster is thriving right at its doorstep. The massive funds flowing north now offset equally massive funds flowing south, hundreds of billions of dollars annually. The cash flow exceeding the GDP of many small nations is steadily flowing back into Mexico. This unprecedented wealth has driven the drug cartels through a final, terrifying metamorphosis. They have transcended the boundaries of traditional criminal organizations. No longer mere drug traffickers, they are evolving into something entirely different, a parallel state, operating alongside Mexico's official government. They are a minor state, at times cooperating with it, at times opposing it, yet perpetually challenging its sovereignty. This transformation began with corruption. This age-old practice has been elevated to industrial scale, from patrol officers to federal prosecutors, from small town mayors to cabinet ministers. The choice facing officials is brutal and simple: money or bullets on a silver platter, briefcases stuffed with cash or coffins filled with corpses. Most choose the silver platter. Police stations become private armies for drug cartels. Officers leak military deployment intelligence. Politicians tailor legislation for their financial backers. Corruption has become the foundation of the system, no longer an anomaly, but the operating system. The state apparatus is not merely infiltrated, it is thoroughly co-opted. Its institutions hollowed out and transformed into tools serving drug cartels. But the foundation of the narco-state is not just bribery. In Mexico's many rural areas, it provides tangible services. Regions forgotten by the central government, local drug cartels become the de facto authority. If a farmer has a dispute with a neighbor, he won't call the police, he'll go to the local boss. Drug cartels pave roads, build churches, sponsor festivals, distribute cash to the poor. In a land of scarce opportunities, they create jobs, deliver swift, albeit brutal justice, combining government and social safety nets. They buy not just silence, but loyalty, weaving themselves into the social fabric of the communities they control. This social control is the soft power that complements hard power, and that hard power has indeed grown formidable. Drug cartels began arming themselves, not in gangster style, but with military specifications. They established training camps in remote mountains and jungles, often run by former Special Forces soldiers from Mexico, Guatemala, and even the United States. The new organization Los Eaters epitomizes this transformation. They are not traditional smugglers turned violent, but violent professionals venturing into smuggling. The group was initially formed by a corps of deserters from Mexico's Army Airborne Special Forces, serving as the elite enforcement arm of the Gulf Cartel. They introduced unprecedented military discipline and technical proficiency to the underworld, pioneering military tactics like encrypted communications for coordinated attacks, and fully integrating terrorism into their control methods. Their arsenal is staggering. They acquired 50-caliber sniper rifles capable of destroying engines, rocket-propelled grenades, automatic grenade launchers, even anti-minus aircraft weapons. They welded thick steel plates onto heavy trucks to create armored combat vehicles dubbed monsters, crude yet highly effective manned platforms. They engaged Mexican military forces in battles lasting hours or even days, shooting down helicopters and sealing off entire cities. Traditional conflict boundaries have completely blurred. This is no longer merely about combating crime, but a low-intensity civil war erupting between rival factions. In neighborhoods of cities like Tijuana, Culiacan, in October 2011, this force demonstrated its most terrifying power. With U.S. intelligence support, Mexican forces launched an operation in Culiacan, attempting to capture Victor Guzman, son of El Chapo Guzman. The operation achieved brief success. Within minutes, the city descended into chaos. Hundreds of armed drug lords engaged in bloody battles in the heart of Culiacan, attempting to reclaim control. The operation struck at the very heart of the Sinaloa cartel, aiming to arrest Victor Guzman, son of El Chapo Guzman. Though the operation briefly succeeded, within minutes the city erupted in riots. Hundreds of fully armed and coordinated cartel gunmen flooded the streets, erecting burning roadblocks, attacking military bases, seizing control of the airport, and taking soldiers' families hostage. The city was paralyzed by internal and external crises. The battle was live-streamed on social media, becoming a vivid example of state dysfunction. Mexican security forces were comprehensively outmatched, outgunned and outnumbered. After hours of intense fighting, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador issued a direct order to prevent further bloodshed. The military must cease operations and release Guzman. The drug cartel won. They confronted the full might of the Mexican state on an open battlefield and forced its retreat. This represents profound humiliation for the government and a terrifying wake-up call for the world. It signifies that in certain regions of Mexico, the state's monopoly on violence, the very foundation of a sovereign nation, has collapsed. The drug lord regime is no longer a shadow government. On that bloody afternoon in July, it became the only government in existence. Drugs have not only corrupted a handful of officials, but also funds a rebellion that holds the entire nation hostage. This silent conquest advances by the gram, and though the American market is insatiable, it remains finite. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, U.S. cities were already drowning in a flood of cocaine. Prices stabilized, competition became brutal, and law enforcement, though clumsy, began applying sustained pressure. As forward-minded thinking global enterprises, Colombian drug cartels understood fundamental business principles. Market diversification. They needed new territories, new wallets and nostrils to conquer, so they turned their gaze eastward, across the vast and lonely Atlantic, toward the Old World. Europe, with its affluent cities, established trade routes, and latent, silent demand became the next logical target. Thus began the Second Front. A European corridor would reshape the global distribution of powdered drugs and draw entirely new players into the storm. The initial methods were almost primitive in their directness. On commercial flights from Bogota to Madrid, a courier's luggage concealed several kilograms of meticulously flattened cargo containers of coffee beans or bananas bound for Lisbon or Naples harbors, harbored minute quantities of the product. These served as probes to test new markets, gauge defenses, and map demand. Yet the Colombians soon realized Europe differed starkly from the Americas. Border controls were vastly different. Languages were more complex. Law enforcement agencies were a fragmented patchwork of jurisdictions. They couldn't simply replicate the Miami model. They urgently needed partners and local expertise, so they allied with Europe's most seasoned and ruthless organized crime syndicates. By comparison, even the Sicilian mafia seemed flashy and reckless. These men from Calabria, the mountainous region of Italy's boot-shaped peninsula, were none other than the Undronga family. For decades, the Undronga family operated from the shadows, like a vast clan with tentacles reaching across their homeland, into Nordic financial centers and across the globe. A colossal hydra. They mastered logistics operations, especially maritime shipping, through a combination of corruption, intimidation, and the cover of legitimate businesses. They control the colossal container port of Toro. This place is a perfect hub. A single cargo ship from South America can unload tens of thousands of containers. For customs officials, finding specific containers filled with cocaine among frozen chicken or industrial machinery is nothing short of a fairy tale, especially when port workers and transport union leaders are on the Delange family payroll. This collaboration epitomizes criminal efficiency. Colombians handle production and transatlantic shipping, while the Delgado Group ensures safe entry into Europe through ports like Rotterdam or Antwerp, and distributes the goods across the continent via its vast, deeply embedded network. Compared to Medellin's bloody street wars, this operational model is more discreet and corporate in nature. Its core lies in shared risk and astronomical profits. The Delgado Group demonstrated impeccable reliability, punctual payments, few questions asked, and professional -grade transportation of tons of cargo, a level of expertise that earned deep respect from Colombian. Transactions that once involved hundreds of kilograms rapidly expanded to tons. Europe's cocaine markets subsequently exploded, from the banking halls of London and Zurich to the Azar riverbanks and Berlin's nightclubs. The white powder became the ubiquitous fuel powering this continent's fast lane. Yet, as shipments surged, the risks of direct routes multiplied. European authorities, recognizing the scale of the problem, began coordinating actions. Maritime patrols intensified, port security upgraded, Drug cartels adjusted their strategies as usual. They opened their maps and discovered a geographical springboard that served as both a barrier and a shortcut. West Africa, the coastline stretching from Senegal to Nigeria, became a massive global cocaine transit hub. This smuggling paradise boasts breathtaking scenery, yet suffers from poverty and the torment of political instability and border chaos. Microstates like Guinea-Bissau, ravaged by coups and corruption, have effectively become the first true narco states outside Latin America. The traffickers' logic is simple and brutal. Large motherships, cargo vessels, or trawlers depart from the coasts of Colombia or Venezuela to rendezvous with smaller speedboats in international waters off Cape Verde or Guinea. Cocaine, sealed in waterproof bags, is transferred here. The speedboats then race ashore to unload on remote beaches or navigate forgotten river channels upstream to meet local pickup teams. Once on African soil, the powder arrives safely, stored in warehouses in Bissau or Conakry, guarded by corrupt officials or private militias. The region already possesses mature smuggling networks. For decades, everything from diamonds to cigarettes to people has flown through it. Cocaine is just another commodity. Routes from West Africa to Europe are diverse. This cargo can be repackaged by large drug teams hidden aboard commercial flights or mixed into cargo planes carrying fish or fruit directly to Paris and Brussels. The most audacious even fly private jets straight into Europe's heartland. These ghost flights submit false flight plans, landing at small airports in Spain or Portugal with lax oversight. Such ingenuity is astonishing. They employ semi-submersible vessels and discreet and submarines capable of carrying tons of cocaine, gliding silently beneath the waves, virtually undetectable by radar or sonar. Europe's smuggling corridors are no longer singular pathways, but have evolved into complex, multi-layered networks, functioning like a circulatory system, injecting white venom into the continent's veins. And the triangle gang soon ceased to be the sole players. The power vacuum after the Soviet collapse and the chaos of the Yugoslav wars gave birth to a new generation of ruthless, efficient criminal syndicates. The Brand Group, especially Serbian and Albanian gangs, rapidly rose to prominence. They are highly disciplined, multilingual, and extremely violent, specializing in overland logistics. Through seamless connections in Shenzhen's borderless zones, they trucked cocaine northward from southern entry ports. They controlled street distribution networks across cities in Germany, Scandinavia, and the UK. In European logistics hubs like Antwerp and Rotterdam, the Moroccan mafia, led by Dutch-Moroccan criminals, waged fierce battles for dock control. Their gang rivalries escalated into a series of shocking public assassinations, shattering the tranquility of Europe's old world. This continent now finds itself embroiled in a cocaine war, perhaps less conspicuous than Colombia's, yet equally corrosive, transforming port cities into battlefields, reducing African villages to global crime hubs. This powder, with its adaptability, found new footholds. As the 21st century advanced, the nature of the powder itself began to shift. Here, the narrative casts another shadow, not from the Andean jungles or cartel boardroom, but from distant underground laboratories and the chemical structure of the drug itself. A new spectre emerged. This synthetic phantom would attach itself to the cocaine trade with devastating consequences. Its name, fentanyl, with -2010 seconds. It began as a faint whisper in autopsy reports and toxicology screenings. What appeared to be cocaine overdose death were accompanied by unusual signs. The deceased did not die from cardiac arrest or asphyxiation, the typical outcome of cocaine fatalities, but from a quiet fading away, respiratory depression, the hallmark of opioid action. Initially, it was thought users were mixing drugs, injecting cocaine and heroin together, but then cases surged. The dead were often people with no history of opioid use. They were weekend travelers, party regulars, who thought they'd bought just a gram of cocaine for a night out. Unbeknownst to them, they had ingested one of the most potent synthetic opioids ever created. Fentanyl is a laboratory-made substance. This pure synthetic drug first emerged in 1959 as a powerful surgical anesthetic. Its potency is 50 times that of heroin and 100 times that of morphine. For those without opioid tolerance, a dose the size of 2 grains of salt can be fatal. For modern drug cartels, especially Mexican trafficking groups that have replaced Colombian syndicates as the dominant force in North American markets, fentanyl represents a commercial miracle. Its precursor chemicals can be obtained cheaply from China, requiring no vast plantations, no management of cocaine farmers, no seasonal harvest, only simple laboratories for production. And its potency is its greatest economic advantage. Pure fentanyl raw material costing only a few $1,000s can be dialed and cut to produce hundreds of thousands of street-sale doses. The contamination of the cocaine stems from this ruthless market logic. Sometimes the cutting is accidental, traffickers using the same scales or mixing surfaces to handle heroin unlaced with fentanyl alongside cocaine. Trace residues invisible to the naked eye are sufficient to cause contamination. Yet this practice increasingly evolves into deliberate manipulation, adulterating cocaine with cheap, potent, and highly addictive synthetic opioids becomes an exceptionally effective commercial strategy. This approach dilutes expensive cocaine to boost profits, while potentially creating a new, powerful dependency for survivors, unwittingly plunging users into the vortex of opioid addiction. After the euphoria of cocaine wears off, fentanyl's heavy anesthetic pull takes over. This mixture often causes confusion and fear. Users crave that unique sensation again, seeking out the same dealer. By this point, their brain chemistry has been completely reshaped by substances they never anticipated ingesting. The public health consequences are nothing short of catastrophic. The cocaine user population is fundamentally distinct from the heroin user population. Most are recreational users who associate their chosen drug with heightened energy, confidence, and all-night revelry. They have no concept of opioid overdose, carry no naloxone, and fail to grasp the risk of respiratory arrest. This party drug has become Russian roulette, snorting a line at a bar or concert, or injecting a dose, can now be a death sentence. The third wave of the opioid crisis has officially arrived. This wave sweeps everyone away. Overdose deaths in the United States, already climbing due to prescription drugs and heroin, have now surged to unprecedented heights. Over 100,000 Americans die annually, a figure once unimaginable. Deaths involving fentanyl-laced cocaine have not only surged dramatically, but continue to expand. This new reality has transformed everything, reshaping risk assessments for millions. Whether informed or not, every street dealer has become a potential grim reaper. Mexican drug cartels, particularly the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel, have become the primary manufacturers of this poison, pressing it into counterfeit prescription pills, lacing it with heroin, methamphetamine, and, of course, cocaine. They utilize smuggling routes perfected over decades, flooding the United States with this poison. Once seen as symbols of glamour and success, the drug of Wall Street traders and Hollywood stars is now inextricably linked to a synthetic killer, devastating communities with plague-like efficiency. Cocaine's grand deception has reached its deadliest phase. The promise of exhilarating pleasure now costs an immediate, shadow of random, silent death, seeking fleeting escape or excitement, or in fact gambling with their lives, unaware that laboratories thousands of miles away have already set deadly traps for them. This white powder is no longer merely a drug. It has become a potential toxic delivery system, a Trojan horse carrying the deadliest synthetic opiate in history. When we reach the end of this long, dark road, all we can do is gaze upon the wreckage. A century of ambition, greed, violence, and despair, all churning in a vortex, all because of a simple alkaloid extracted from coca leaves. The legacy of cocaine is not recorded in history books, but it is etched into the earth's surface, carved into the fabric of society, buried deep in millions of graves. This is a legacy of blotted powder. First, look at this land, the Amazon basin, the lungs of the earth, burying deep, eternal scars. For every hectare of coca leaf cultivated, several times that land is destroyed. This catastrophe began with /- burn farming, ancient forest stubbled by flames and machetes to make way for illicit crops. These plantations exhaust fragile soils within years, forcing growers to push deeper into the rainforest, leaving behind a patchwork of devastation. But the destruction extends far beyond logging. The process of transforming coca leaves into coca in paste, the first step toward the final white powder, is a chemical war on the environment. This is no clean chemical reaction. It is a dirty operation conducted in makeshift, hidden jungle laboratories, using toxic chemical slurries. They strip alkaloids from the leaves using rivers of solvents, like gasoline or kerosene, then refine them with acidic and alkaline solutions, such as sulfuric acid, caustic soda, and potassium dichromate. Once the process concludes, where do these toxins go? They are dumped directly onto forest soil, depleting its fertility, or they flow into the nearest streams, merging with the mighty Amazon and Orinoco river systems. The toxins kill fish, contaminate drinking water sources in remote communities, and create vast dead zones within what was once Earth's most biodiverse ecosystem. For every gram of cocaine consumed in a distant city's nightclub, a corresponding venom pours into the world's core. This silent ecological catastrophe continues to spread, becoming the invisible environmental cost of a global addiction, not to mention the legacy of corruption and the hollowing out of nations. Cocaine money acts like a universal corrosive, dissolving the foundations of institutions, melting bonds of loyalty, and eroding the very foundations of civic ideals. In Colombia during the 1980 seconds and 90 seconds, and in Mexico after the 2002, drug cartels' power has grown to rival that of the state. They not only bribe officials, but function as parallel governments, faced with sheriffs, judges, mayors, even presidential candidates. They offered only two choices: a silver platter laden with cash, or a coffin filled with lead. Most chose the silver platter. Entire government departments, police forces and judicial systems thus became subordinate to drug lords' enterprises. Those brave souls who chose to stand up paid with their lives. Their murders became the cruelest warning to all who dared resist. This creates a vicious cycle of self-minus perpetuation. A nation weakened by corruption and fear lacks the capacity to provide its citizens with security and justice. The residents of Sumi turn instead to the local drug lord. He establishes order through brutal means, using drug money to build schools and churches, while executing rivals in the market square. The line between government and organized crime gradually blurs until it vanishes entirely. Thus, the narco-minus state was born. This is not solely a Latin American phenomenon. We witness its shadow spreading across West Africa. Drug money finances coups. It props up corrupt regimes. This powder corrodes everything it touches. It constructs a phantom world of phantom politicians, phantom police, phantom economies, all fueled by an endless stream of illicit funds. Ultimately, humanity pays an incalculable price. The height of this pyramid of suffering far exceeds ordinary comprehension. At its base lie the cocoa farmers. They are not drug lords, often merely impoverished peasants strapped by economics and geography, cultivating the only crop guaranteeing meager sustenance. They survive caught between the iron grip of traffickers and the eradication squads of the government. Life is a constant game of survival against violence. Above them are the chemists, in jungle labs, inhaling toxic fumes. Their lives are expendable. Next up are the mules, desperate young men and women, swallowing condoms stuffed with cocaine or strapping drugs to their bodies, praying they won't get caught, and praying the packages won't rupture inside them. This is undoubtedly a cruel and inevitable death. Violence is ever minus present. The Sake or Rio hitmen are often recruited from the slums. They regard life as worthless. Killing is merely a job. The endless war waged by drug cartels over smuggling routes is not war in the traditional sense. It is an extermination campaign marked by torture, dismemberment, and public massacres as hallmarks of extermination campaigns designed to intimidate both rivals and civilians. In Mexico alone, hundreds of thousands have perished. Colombian generations know only conflict. American inner-city communities lie ravaged by the cocaine-plagued gang warfare. This force relentlessly fuels. The cost extends beyond corpses to the traumatized survivors, orphans, displaced families, and millions whose lives are utterly shattered by this trade. At the apex of the pyramid stand the users. In a sense, they too are victims, trapped in the shackles of powerful addiction. Yet they are also the engines fueling this infernal machine. Occasional users at banquets, addicts in dark alleys, bankers celebrating successful deals. Their demand acts as a signal, transmitted layer by layer along the supply chain, driving the entire vicious cycle. Their money is the fuel for this machine, cocaine's deadliest deception. Its greatest and most enduring deception lies in disguising this global pyramid of suffering as a mirror minus like white powder. It promises power, ecstasy, and allure, yet its true legacy is a land scarred beyond recognition, a nation torn apart, and a death toll forever impossible to fully tally. As long as the world continues to crave, this legacy woven from blood and powder will endlessly psych and regenerate.